After a very enjoyable start to the year, Week 2 of the Overwatch League is now on the horizon. How will things go this time as some new teams get into the mix? I guess we'll find out soon. Before getting into those predictions, here are my takeaways from last week's key matches that I made. Starting with the Battle of Texas, I would say it very much lived up to the hype. It came down to a 5-map thriller to help breathe some new life into a rivalry that's been pretty one-sided these last couple of years, and the Outlaws did it. They won a map 5. I would say it was luck because Dallas were without a hit scan, but they literally beat the Shock, so no excuses there. Speaking of the Shock, their game with the Gladiators, I think it was a bit disappointing results-wise. It was not much of a contest in the second half of that series in particular, because it was all Shock, but it was still pretty enjoyable thanks to some fun strats that the Shock ran, as well as the Gladiators not running Bird Ring on control. That was very interesting. With Chengdu versus the Valiant, it absolutely surpassed my expectations. The Valiant took a map which is more than you could ever ask for. They showed promise, but ultimately, Chengdu were in control and they looked pretty good while doing so. My boy Leaf absolutely popped off. Next we have Seoul versus Philly, and I was very much off the mark with this one because I expected the Fusion to look slow thanks to some emergency substitutes, but they showed no such thing out there. They were the superior team, but even so, it was still a pretty close game. The Fusion came out on top, but a few of those maps were pretty tightly contested. Seoul had some questionable decision making at times, and I think their opponents were simply more disciplined, which helped them come out on top. The next game to discuss is the Fuel versus Gladiators matchup. I can't say this one went the way I expected it to either, because Dallas showed some incredible adjustments after a rough first day. They fully played up to their comfort picks, and it really threw their opponents off balance. The Glad simply could not adjust as they got outplayed and outcoached, and now they're off to an 0-2 start. Good on Dallas for getting the win, by the way. That is absolutely huge. And finally, we close out my key matches of last week with Toronto versus Atlanta, and for a while, this was not looking like my best prediction until Toronto pulled off an epic reverse sweep. They made some great adaptations in that series. Them switching to their comfort picks instead of matching Atlanta in the Rush mirror was the key. The Reign showed poor flexibility. They were extremely dominant on Rush, but the moment the map turned out of their favor or teams stopped trying to match them, it all fell apart. Meanwhile, Toronto are off to a nice 2-0 start. They looked pretty good out there. They showed excellent adaptations and resilience throughout the whole weekend. Now let's see if they can keep it up. Alrighty, with Week 1 thoughts now out of the way, now on to my Week 2 predictions. To kick us off, the Vancouver Titans play the Paris Eternal. Believe it or not, but I am highlighting this as a key match of the week. The common consensus is that these two are at the bottom of their region, so I'm curious to see who is the clear-cut bottom team for sure. The two teams feel pretty even on paper, so I am expecting a close game. We have yet to see Paris play, but Rush feels like it's going to be right up their alley because the European region loves these brawly up-close and personal comps. That's just how it's been historically. But after what happened last week, it appears the Titans do as well. Despite losing both of their games, they put up a far better fight than I thought they would, taking a map in each contest. Guys like Fried Wiener, yes, we can say his real name now, and Dalton did fairly well. If the Titans can take maps off teams who are clearly better, you'd have to imagine they make a contest with Paris interesting since they're right around the same skill level. This is one of the matchups that feels pretty 50-50. There's reason to feel good about Vancouver, but how much can I trust them without knowing what Paris can do? I'm going to be taking a wild guess and say the Paris Eternal win 3-2. I have zero confidence in this pick whatsoever because the Titans might be the better pick after the weekend they had, but my gut at the same time is kind of telling me that Paris is going to feel more comfortable out there. They're going to love playing the Rushmere, I think that's pretty certain, and honestly, I think I favor them on it. I believe that Naga will be the best Mei in the lobby, and that Onigod will hold his own against Lynxer and Dalton. Not only that, but I favor Paris in the support department due to me simply liking Khan's Baptiste more than Rolf's. But in reality, while I'm talking about Rush, it might actually come down to who does better outside of that comp. In those maps where it's not as effective, who is going to show the better flexibility? And that low-key might be the Vancouver Titans. I feel their tanks are going to be stronger in a dive setting. It really might depend on how much these teams stray away from the norm. Neither of these teams are projected to be very good, but this feels like a compelling matchup that I'm very much looking forward to. Next will be the LA Gladiators versus London Spitfire. There's two interesting factors here. One is, of course, that London finally gets to play. A lot of fans have been hyping up their British Hurricane core, and what better way to test their might than against the Gladiators? Speaking of the Glads, this game is very important for them as well. After a rough 0-2 start, they are now in dire need of a victory. Going down 0-3 would surely mean they miss out on qualifying for the May Melee. Only 6 teams from the West are going to make it, so they can't afford to lose anymore. If they can't win their next 2 games convincingly, that might be curtains. After a disappointing opening week, I am looking for the Gladiators to bounce back. This is what championship caliber teams are made of. Resilience and adaptations are key. If the Gladiators want to prove they could be a contender, they need to bounce back with authority. But can they do it? Well, after what they showed me last week, it might not be so easy, especially when considering that London is a team that should feel in their element in this meta. This team may not be a title contender, but you have to give them respect because their tank line has great synergy and they have some dangerous playmakers at DPS. On paper, the Gladiators definitely have the advantage, but synergy and coaching could play a role in this. How will the Gladiators respond if London get creative? Can we expect them to figure things out this time around? Well, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt this time at least. One bad week does not cement your future. This team is very talented and I trust in that group of guys to get back on track. I'm giving it to the Gladiators in a 4-map set. London could make them work for this because the Spitfire do have some underrated players, but at the end of the day, they still are outmatched. A far stronger support line gives the Gladiators a true edge. They finally get their first win and get back on track. Starting off Saturday will be yet another key match, the Chengdu Hunters versus the new look NYXL. This has the making of a fantastic game. Chengdu looked very strong in week 1, and they're clashing against a young and exciting NYXL team who have generated a ton of hype with the scrim results apparently. That in itself makes this an interesting affair. Scrimbucks have given us mixed results so far, and I'm not really sure what to believe as a result. I personally like the NYXL regardless of the rumors, so I'm kind of hoping they prove the believers right. I know Chengdu are coming off a 3-0 win over Shanghai, but I have confidence the NYXL make this a game. They're well equipped to deal with them, I feel, because for one, they have the film. They can look at what the Dragons did wrong and plan accordingly, all while the Hunters have yet to see them play at full force. The element of surprise is definitely on their side, but also, their roster matches up well in my opinion because I very much prefer the New York support line thanks to Jonak. The Eastern region has been playing a lot of Zenyatta, which greatly favors him for obvious reasons. I also have confidence in the NYXL DPS line to match Chengdu's pound for pound. They pretty much cover everything with their 4 guys. Guangbun can handle Jimmy and or Leave on the hitscan duties, Flora should be a stronger Sombra than anybody on Chengdu as well as a solid hitscan in general, Ivy can be in for Tracer and provides a lot of good overall flexibility, and I think Feather has a lot of good flexibility as well, and especially as the Echo on lockdown. The NYXL have a chance, they're such a capable group. But after the incredible week that Chengdu had, I think I'm going to play it safe and go with the Hunters in a 3-2 victory. Rolling Shanghai the way they did is a bit more valuable than scrim results for me. I wouldn't be surprised if the NYXL won because I really do think they're that good and Chengdu are extremely inconsistent from a historical standpoint, but the changes they made gives me faith that this year could be different. So I say they take it as Leave and the rookies lead the way. Closing out the Eastern region games for Saturday will be a showdown between the Philadelphia Fusion and Hangzhou Spark. Will the hot Fusion gain the upper hand, or will the loaded Spark have too many weapons to stop? Now, of course, it's always difficult to judge when you've only seen one team, but not the other. One good week could definitely blind you to the truth, but on the other hand, a team you're high on who you haven't seen yet could be a huge letdown. Now that we kind of know what the meta is like though, we can judge who is likely to come out on top. As we all know, Asia seems to prefer Winston and Wrecking Ball Dive with Ashe, Tracer, Zen, and Brig, and if that continues to be the case, I am leaning towards the Fusion because it plays more up to their strengths. Mono, he's definitely a better ball than Gushue based off of past years, and Toby is a clear-cut better Brig than IDK and Mika if you go off Season 3. If I'm being real, I fail to see how the Spark grab any advantages outside of off-tank possibly. MCD seems like a promising flex support prospect, but it's very difficult to see him holding a candle to Alarm of all people. I like the Spark and how deep their team is, but I am generally higher on Philly, so I have the Fusion winning the series 3-1. This could be a trap, but I was thoroughly impressed with how the Fusion performed during opening week. They appear to be very confident. The new guys have given this team life. Philly are hungry. It's a new year and they are here to win. The Spark have questions that need answering still, so I do not feel comfortable picking them against a strong and proven opponent like the Fusion. Game number 1 of the Saturday North America games will be between the red-hot Houston Outlaws and the Paris Eternal. It's funny because even if Houston didn't surpass my expectations, I'd still expect them to come out on top here. Regardless of last week's 2-0 start, it would be hard to see them coming up short. Even before the season started, I still thought Jungwoo and Piggy were probably going to at least be even with Dan and Elivote. Now granted, it wasn't by much back then, but now it genuinely might be a clear-cut advantage. These two look so comfortable out there in a rush meta. Even if Dan and Elivote do as well, the Houston tank line have proven themselves against some well-established star players, so I have confidence the Outlaws assert their will in the tank battle, and when you add that with the DPS, the Outlaws are the favorites, no doubt about it. Dante and Happy definitely have more potential than Naga, Onigat, and Suna, especially given the circumstances. If this was preseason me, I would say the Outlaws win like 3-1 or maybe 3-2, but after proving themselves the way they did last week, I am convinced that they take this in a sweep. Am I going to regret trusting the Outlaws? Perhaps, but it's hard to see them messing this one up unless Paris can exploit a weakness that the Shock and Fuel somehow couldn't. It's just a team and coaching difference, really. The Outlaws are extremely comfortable out there, and they have some real playmakers on their hands that Paris will not be able to overcome. Relatively easy win for the Outlaws here as they improve to 3-0 in the qualifier. Taking us to the halfway mark of the weekend is the Boston Uprising versus LA Gladiators, which will be another key match of the week. I'm on a Gladiators kick right now because I am so curious to see how this new squad handles adversity. Well, that, and I'm excited to watch Boston. Their strength of schedule for the qualifiers this month is easily one of the toughest. They have a good chance early on to show us if they can hang in there with the top teams. Boston could low-key assume a gatekeeper role this year. If you beat them, then you're likely a decent team. If you lose to them, though, you're middle of the pack at best. It's very important to keep in mind that Boston do not have absurdly high expectations this year, and that could make them a big-time problem for a team that could fall way under expectations early on and have a ton of pressure on them to perform. All of the pressure in the world is on the Glads in this game. They're supposed to be a contender. Not making the May Melee tournament would be a bad look. The good news for the Glads is that this game is definitely winnable, though. But just because it's winnable does not mean it's going to be easy. I personally thought that Stand 1 was a solid rhyme last year before he got benched, and the Boston off-tank situation is intriguing. Now that Gabe Bolsey has been promoted, we'll have to be on the watch for him if he plays over Punk. It would make sense to play him given the potential and the chance to run a fully Korean lineup, but you never know, I suppose. But if he does play, I suspect that he could give Space a hard time. Week 1 was not great for Space, and the competition at his position has greatly increased over these last few years. He's not really what you'd consider a S-tier player anymore. It's been a while. And Gabe Bolsey, in most people's eyes, was a top 2 off-tank prospect coming out of contenders this year. He is a beast, and I have a lot of confidence that he could look better than Space on Zarya and Sigma. Despite the Gladiators being stronger on paper, I believe there's a chance Boston gives them a serious run for their money. The start they had last week could cause some self-doubt and personal demons to overcome, and if that's the case, the Uprising instantly becomes scary. However, I see the Gladiators figuring it out as they go on to win 3-2. With a confidence booster against London and learning from last week's mistakes, they bounce back while potentially struggling along the way. As disappointing as they were last week, they still are a very talented group. Until they consistently disappoint me, I'll remain confident in them to get wins, even if they're not always pretty. They have the stronger overall team, so you would have to imagine they win here. Birdring and Moth pop off as the Gladiators finish their qualifiers at 2-2. Closing out Saturday is a showdown between the Washington Justice and Dallas Fuel, and this is going to be a key match for 2 reasons. 1, we get to see the Justice play, we get Mag's debut, Decay's first full year on Washington, hopefully at least, and the start of a potential Bebe and Closer redemption arc. And 2, I am low-key curious to see how Dallas handle yet another top-tier opponent without being at full strength. If last week told me anything, it's that Dallas are still scary to deal with even without Exy. Beating the Gladiators and almost taking down an Outlaws team who beat the Shock is insanely impressive. It goes to show that this team and their coaching might be even better than I initially gave them credit for, but this is a whole new challenge. Much like the Glads, the Justice have been receiving a ton of hype, and unlike their Week 1 opponents, the Justice do have some film to look at. You'd have to assume Dallas roll out with many of the same comfort picks as we saw in Week 1, and if that's the case, the Justice might know exactly what to expect, and because I respect their coaching so much, there's a good chance they execute a good counter strategy. But who knows? Maybe Dallas has some things up their sleeves that they have yet to unveil, or perhaps the map line will be in favor of their comfort picks. There's a lot of variables that could help Dallas stay in the match or even win it for that matter. But in the end, I do think Washington will be ready, which is why I have them winning 3-1. The Dallas support line was not as great as I thought they'd be last week, so maybe that opens up the door for Bebe and Closer to hold their own. Given that they're up against Fury and Mag, there's no clear-cut advantage at tank either. Along with that, it's hard for me to imagine them containing Decay. I know I said that about Birdring last week, but this is Decay we're talking about. It's not just the McCree you have to worry about with him. The Tracer is going to be an issue. Sparkle was impressive on that hero last week, yes, but Decay is a whole different beast compared to Dante and Kevster. I'm expecting the field to put up a good fight though. I doubt there's any way they just sit down and get rolled. It won't be enough to get the win though. Starting off Sunday is the NYXL versus the Hangzhou Spark. Two teams I've yet to see play. Oh boy, what could possibly go wrong? Oh wait, probably everything. It's another one of those games where you kind of have to wing it and go by your power rankings. Last week I did that with the Atlanta-Toronto game, so maybe I'll get lucky again. In my opinion, the NYXL are the better team. I think their roster offers you more versatility, which is invaluable given the current state of the meta. In Double Bubble, it feels pretty even. Both teams have a reliable Zarya and Winston player on hand, and I would say it's fairly close at hit scan and main support. Where I think the NYXL gain a little bit of separation is at flex support and flex DPS. I for one believe Jonek is going to have a great year. This team has been designed in a way where they can play around him a lot more, and I don't see a rookie getting the best of him in that type of situation. And no disrespect to Architect, but he's a one-man show who has to go up against three guys who could come in and flex onto things that they're better at. The Spark have a ton of potential, but I need them to show me they can piece it together first. They need to prove to me that they can make a diverse roster work. Until I see that evidence, I'm going against them if they're playing somebody I highly rate. I'm picking New York to win 3-1. I feel this team has a better sense of direction currently. They're young and unproven, but I've heard nothing but good things about them. I look at their roster and it appears like they know what they're doing, and the Spark don't quite give me the same vibe. Closing out the Eastern games for the week is the Chengdu Hunters versus the Philadelphia Fusion. Key match alert, ladies and gentlemen. In fact, game of the week alert potentially here. This one might be a banger. These are the early favorites from this region after last week because they both played amazing Overwatch. If we can trust Chengdu to play consistently, this matchup should come down to the wire. On paper, Philly should be the stronger team, but I did say the same thing about Shanghai last week, and look what happened. The Chengdu zone is very much a real thing, and some of their big playmakers may be enough to keep them in the game despite the potential weaknesses they're dealing with. Leaf can hang in there with Rascal, especially in a Tracer meta. In fact, I prefer Leaf in that situation, and Gaga low-key might be good enough to handle Mono. This will be a really good test for this promising rookie. If he can be evenly matched with a superstar like this, then it's time to acknowledge him as the real deal if you're still a doubter. The flex DPS and main tank matchups will be critical for Chengdu because the rest of their team may not stack up too well. I believe in Elsa to maybe counter Hoppa, but what's the plan at support and hit scan? I'm sorry to say it, but I don't have a ton of faith in the Chengdu rookies to outplay Alarm, Toby, and Carpe to a certain extent. That's asking for a lot. As much as I love Jimmy, Carpe is a whole different animal. It's not going to be like outplaying DM or Lip on a struggling Shanghai team. If last week told us anything, then Carpe is going to have room to maneuver. It'll be up to Chengdu to find a way to knock him out of his comfort zone. They have to pressure him hard or at least give him less room than he'd like. Otherwise, I fear that Carpe may take over this game. Also, I have no idea what they plan to do to get both Toby and Alarm out of rhythm at the same time. I suppose they could look at what Seoul did on Blizzard World Attack, but Philly were quick to make adjustments and they even won that map in the end. I know Chengdu looked really good last week, but I am not going against my gut. Philly win 3-2. The Fusion feel like they have a better grasp on the meta than Shanghai currently, so I trust them to get the job done. Many of their superstars do have the matchup advantage in my opinion, so I can't go against them. But even so, I still do believe that Chengdu could play up to their competition and make this interesting. Regardless of the outcome, it should be a lot of fun. Moving back into the West, we start with the Outlaws versus the Spitfire. This logic could come back to bite me, but again, it's very difficult to imagine Houston beating Dallas and San Francisco, then losing to a mid-tier team at best. Originally, I had the Spitfire ahead of Houston in my power rankings, but right now, I don't think there's any way that London could be the better team. Originally, I gave the Spitfire the advantage because I thought they'd have the better synergy, but now I'm not too sure because Jungkook and Piggy are fitting in a lot better than I imagined. Because they're incredible as a duo, that means that Hadi and Molfig will have their work cut out for them. But now it seems like Houston have a leg up on support as well. Crimzo and Ripa, they're about even for me, but now Juby has completely blown away my expectations, so I immediately like him more than Kellic, so I truly do believe we'll be the weak link of London this year. I do trust in the Spitfire DPS at least, because I'm very high on Shax and Blase, but they can only do so much on their own, especially when they're playing Dante and Happy. After the way they played last week, I have the Outlaws winning in 4 maps. Maybe the London tanks and DPS make it interesting, but ultimately, they should fall unless they can find a way to force Houston off their comfort picks. If they can get lucky with the maps, or maybe force them into like double bubble or maybe double shield, then perhaps they could make this a good game. But I have no idea what London plans to do, and no matter what they try, I really don't know if it'll be enough, so I'm playing it safe and going with the easier choice. Sliding into the middle spot is the Boston Uprising versus the Dallas Fuel, and this is going to be my final key match of the week. Once again, I have a good feeling about Boston here. They're a talented young group with very intelligent coaching. Also, there's a cool little storyline to follow here as Stand 1 tries to prove himself against the player who benched him on Shanghai, and if I'm being honest, they match up fairly well with Dallas overall. Sparkle and Doha were incredible last week, but Valentine and I'm37 could match them because they were a solid duo and contenders in my opinion. Valentine is pretty flexible himself, and he could genuinely play better than Doha on like Echo or perhaps May, and I'm37 has an opportunity to play signature McCree, and that could be a big problem for the Fuel. We saw what Happy did to them last week on that character, and I'm37 very well could do the same. Along with DPS, Boston might be able to grab the edge in the support battle. Repel, Jexe, and Fielder are coming off an up and down week where they showed that they aren't as strong as I initially gave them credit for. Faith Myungbong could be a sick duo that is hard to deal with. Faith has the synergy with the DPS on his team and his head coach, and Myungbong had an underappreciated season last year. Their combined might could give Dallas all they can handle. Boston appears to be fairly even at all of those positions, but the same might not end up applying with their tank line sadly. Stand 1, Gay Bolsi, and Punk is not bad at all, but Hanbin Fearless is on a different level. They both had a promising debut last week, and I expect them to continue that level of play. This is the place where Boston could fall short, and I'm especially worried about Stand 1 against Fearless. As cool as it would be to see Stand 1 get some revenge, he got benched for a reason. Fearless is a more well-rounded player with higher playmaking potential, and that is why I'm predicting the Dallas Fuel to win a closely contested game in 5 maps. While Boston have a shot to assert themselves at DPS and support, I feel that the Dallas tanks will make more plays. I know it may seem like I'm disrespecting the Fuel here, but I truly do believe the Uprising are a decent match for them. They're pretty even in a lot of different aspects. Moving on to the final game of the week, the Titans will try their luck against the Justice. It goes without saying that Washington are the favorites, and it's not close. I'm more so interested to see if the Titans continue their streak of taking a map off teams you'd expect them to get crushed by. They managed to do it against the Mayhem and Defiant last week, so theoretically they could do it against the Justice. The odds are very, very low, but maybe the Titans take advantage of the chaos that comes from like a control map, or maybe the Justice tried a silly strategy and it fails miserably. I don't know, but I guess there's a chance. I'm hoping there's a chance at least, just to make things a little bit interesting. If the Justice live up to the hype, then this should be a blowout. I have the Justice winning quite convincingly in a sweep. The Titans get outclassed and outcoached. Mag, Fury, and Decay should be in for a dominant day, as the Titans simply cannot match them on Rhine, Winston, Diva, or Tracer. Vancouver's lack of star power will truly show here as they go back to the drawing board after yet another unsuccessful week. With that in mind, the second week of predictions is now in the history books. What are your predictions for this week? Are there going to be any surprises? Are there any games you think we should be on the lookout for? Tell us down in the comments below. If you enjoyed the content, I would appreciate it so much if you could give this video a like and subscribe if you want more prediction content like this. And as always, thank you all for watching. I appreciate your support so much, and until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.